let me explain to you the very intricate issues of the delayed choice quantum eraser experience in conjunction with the coach inspector theorem. Like, I can do that, but obviously not a lot of people are going to understand that aspect.
Yeah, I'm a bald Keanu Reeves in a divine matrix.
Right.
Let's get into it. So Michael Jones, if you don't know him, he runs a channel and ministry called Inspiring Philosophy.
It is an awesome channel, by the way. Everyone should be a subscriber to it.
I think most of them are. But if you're not, you should be.
You should be.
Fantastic content and unique content, as we're going to see today. It's a little bit different than the standard fare apologetic stuff out there. You know, just a rehashing of the Kalam like you might get at Trinity Radio or something. It's like something a little more unique, newer, relying on some of it newer ideas or ideas that are now gaining popularity. And also, but he's not just interested in weird physics stuff, right, Michael? He's doing some biblical stuff too. So tell us a little bit about your channel and why you're doing what you're doing.
Well, long story short, basically, it just gotten around to being kind of like a Christian. I got out of college and I was firmly a Christian, but I kept getting videos sent to me on Facebook and elsewhere from big atheist YouTubers. And I was like, there's got to be some sort of Christian response out there. And so I decided I'll make a couple videos and see what I can do. And then I'll call it quits after about 13 or 14 videos. Well, I did a couple, and then I did a couple more, and then people asked me to do some more, and it kind of just kept going. So I just started this idea that maybe I should build a Christian apologetic video library, a video library on YouTube and on the internet where we have a video answer for every apologetic question out there. So that's why I cover the wide range of topics that I do, because I'm really trying to build this giant library to cover just about every possible topic you could think of.
See, I like that. He says that people asked him to make videos. It's not just somebody dumping videos out there and sharing them with everybody and trying to, I want to do this.
Become internet famous.
Yeah. It's please make another video, and so you do. So I like that because it means that people actually care what you have to say. The way we did it was we just kept dumping out videos.
Yeah, that's. But now, so you're trying to, according to the trailer video that used to be on your YouTube channel, you're trying to make a video for every imaginable apologetics issue or issue that might come up in apologetics, and so that's an ambitious goal. What percentage along the way are you?
I'm probably only maybe 2 to 5%. I mean, there's still so much more that needs covered. But right now I'm trying to go through the Old Testament a little bit. I'm probably going to do a series on monotheism in the winter, addressing the idea that the Bible used to be polytheistic, or that Abraham and Moses were polytheists. So I'll do some stuff on that. But yeah, I've done a lot for the arguing for God's existence, New Testament reliability, the resurrection argument, defending the Trinity, that kind of stuff so far. I'm doing a series on alleged Bible contradictions, a whole series on those alleged pagan deities that are supposed to be, that Jesus is supposed to be a copy of. I'm almost done with that. So I've done a lot of stuff like that so far.
Yeah, parallelomania, that's internet popular arguments. Yeah, it's kind of a bunk way to look at it, but I mean, people are still throwing it out there, so you have to address it. Now, I want to ask you a question because you're interested in philosophy, you're interested in scripture and exegesis. So in my experience around evangelicals, your channel is called Inspiring Philosophy, and a lot of evangelicals poo-poo philosophy. I don't know if you came across this or not, but there you always hear things about, philosophy needs to take a back seat to theology and exegesis and all that, as if exegesis itself is not underwritten by philosophical arguments and philosophical presuppositions and values that inform the method of exegesis you're using. And of course, theology itself can't be done without philosophy. So what do you say to those people that say, well, because here's the thing, William Lane Craig, for example, he's got an earned doctorate in theology, but he also has an earned doctorate in philosophy, and people typically associate him with the philosophical stuff. So anytime he talks about the Bible, the first thing they say is, his philosophy colors everything. He can't do proper exegesis because he puts philosophy first. Have you run into anything like that? And what do you say to people who would say that kind of thing to you or criticize you by saying, obviously philosophy first, that kind of colors over everything that he thinks about theology or exegesis or anything else? What do you say to people like that?
I mean, the most obvious thing to say is, well, that's a philosophical claim in and of itself. If you're going to say my philosophy is coloring everything, well, then that's a philosophical claim you're putting forward of your view that you have this philosophical presupposition that philosophy colors everything. Well, that's doing philosophy. Philosophy basically means wisdom. It's the basis of all knowledge. You can't do theology unless you have wisdom. You can't do science unless you have wisdom. You can't do anything. Philosophy is the underlying study from which everything else really is sort of built upon. I mean, it's the first step towards wisdom. So everyone is doing philosophy, whether they want to admit it or not. If someone says philosophy is dead, that's a philosophical claim in and of itself. So therefore, philosophy is not dead. So I get that from hardcore scientists and fundamentalist Christians. It's amazing how those two groups sometimes use the same arguments.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the minute you begin to read the words on the page and formulate your thoughts, you're already going to run into philosophy pretty quickly. But you're going to hear people say out there, yeah, well, he should be trying to inspire exegesis. So he should be trying to inspire.
Hashtag theology matters. It trumps. I got a whole rant. So you're now my favorite person on the planet.
Well, he's a lot of
Next
people's
direction,
favorite.
yeah.
I was going to say among apologists who engage in
yeah.
internet debates on YouTube, which is a particular kind of apologist, I don't think I'm exaggerating to say that you're the most celebrated. One of the reasons for that is that you seem willing to engage with almost anyone about anything related to Christianity or theism more broadly. So given that, why don't you walk us through, if it's okay with you? I mean, I don't want you to give away your trade secrets, but let's say modern day debates or Cameron Bertuzzi or somebody calls you up and they say, hey, I want you to debate somebody, this guy, he's a philosopher, and we're going to debate, whether, like one weird debate you did was the Christian, or Christmas is all based on pagan stuff. So, so someone tells you something like that. Obviously, for most of us who are in the theology geek, apologetics geek world, we're going to have some built-in thoughts about those things instantly, but you obviously have to prepare. So what do you do when you get that call and begin preparing?
Well, I don't have any secrets, so I'm fine to share this. The only secrets I have is upcoming videos, what I'm working on. I want to wait to reveal that. But I've been open about this in the past on other channels. The first thing I do is I see who the person is. I look at their credentials. I look and see what level they're on, what their specialties are, and I watch their videos. And I don't just listen to the content. I watch their facial expressions. I watch how they handle themselves in conversations or debates, what they put out. Learn what they think is confidence, and then I project it back onto them. So, half of the debate is psychology, knowing what your opponent is, what they think is going to look confident. So I do that, and then I spend a lot of time going over the material. I've been in debates where I have prepared notes, and I don't get to use 75% of my notes because I treat them as if they are the final expert on this subject, and I want to be prepared as if they are like the world-renowned expert on this issue. That way, I if they throw me a curveball, I'm pretty much ready. And for the most part, that rarely happens now because I do a lot of prep work into these types of debates.
Yeah, well, we can both relate to that. We both had live public on-stage debates, and I haven't had one yet where, and this is not a slight to anyone who I've debated, but I could have probably debated them and done well the next day after I scheduled the debate. But the most recent debate with Matt Dillahunty, I prepared for 8 months for that. And I prepared for everything. Like I read Richard Bauckham twice. I read Van Voorst. I went through everything and thought of every possible counter argument for everything. And then, you're like, why did I put this notebook of data together that I didn't even get to use,
Yeah, that's happened to me. In the first 2 minutes of my opponent's opening statement, I said, I don't need anything.
Yeah.
This was a complete waste of time.
So of your debates, I think this would be an interesting thing for people to know.
Well, I want to ask about the debate about is Christmas pagan? That's interesting debate because every Christmas and Easter, by the way, it's not just secularists, but it's Christians in my Facebook feed talking about you're a whatever worshiper. If you're all about Ishtar and you're a bunny worshiper. If all that stuff I get, but I get it from Christians too. So, how do you actually find somebody who will sit down engage in that particular issue, do you get challenged on that, or do you go find somebody who's spewing out this kind of nonsense and say, hey, I want to talk about that? How do you get debates on those kinds of subjects, or how do you find debate opponents on those?
Oh man, that's complicated, because I put it out last Christmas that I would debate anyone on it, and I didn't get any replies. I think people, because they're kind of getting familiar that I've become so versed on that topic, they're kind of afraid now to debate me on it. But the first guy I debated was a guy named Zach Bauer, who is like a crazy fundamentalist Christian. And that was probably one of my favorite debates, because he was so underprepared. That's like someone throwing a softball to me. I can just sort of, hit out of the park really easily, because I know all the primary sources on that subject.
Right.
So, I look for people to debate me on that one. But I get a lot of people to turn me down, surprisingly.
So you have had, he was the guy who debated the hardcore young Earth creationist guy, right?
Kent Hovind.
Ken Hovind, that was him, right? I thought that debate was quite entertaining too.
That debate was bittersweet for me, and I'll tell you why. We're not here to talk about me, but when I first got into apologetics in the early 2000s, I thought it was all about the creationism debate. I thought that's what apologetics was. And so I got the sermon audio was the place where you could download stuff, and I got Ken Ham and Kent Hovind, and I thought it was awesome. Yeah. And so I listened to nothing but those two guys and loved it. And then I kind of started listening to Norman Geisler and William Lane Craig, because Ken Ham specifically kept talking. I don't think he called them heretics, but that was the impression. These heretics that believe in an old earth. And so I was like, well, I got to hear what these heretics have to say. So I began to read these guys, and I thought, these heretics are making some good points. So anyway, but what I was going to ask you is, what would you say is the debate you're most pleased with? And what I mean by that is not just you thought you did really well, but you thought this person actually was a credible opponent, and I was pleased with how it went.
Credible opponent. Okay, so you narrowed it there. Good to know. Yeah. I thought if I had to say a guy who I really respect, and I left, not having anything against him, would probably be my debate with Cosmic Skeptic. I think it was about a year ago or so on Capturing Christianity channel. He's a very intelligent guy. I was really happy with how he did in that debate. I was really happy with the outcome, and I still have I hope it's mutual respect, but I still have respect for him as a person, and disagree with him, of course, but I thought that was good. One of my favorite debates, of course, was my debate with Godless Engineer on Jesus mysticism. And the reason is because about 3 months after that debate, a mysticist contacted me and said I won that debate. They now think Jesus was an actual historical person, and they started watching my videos. And it took a little while, but they started becoming more open to the idea of Christianity itself. So,
praise the Lord.
So that was probably my favorite debate of all time, just for the outcome. But my favorite debate with a person I highly respect would probably be with Cosmic Skeptic.
See, I get him and Rationality Rules and all these. I get them all. Unlike Braxton, who's the president of the seminary, I actually have to work around here, so I don't get to watch as much YouTube as I like. So I get all of these confused. I know I've actually responded to these videos and say, hey, watch this and let's talk about it. But
Rationality Rules is the guy with the long hair.
Okay, so and
Cosmic Skeptics
is the one that I thought had good hair.
He's the Oxford guy.
I'm a barber, so I pay attention to hairstyle.
So now let's talk about this. You've got an argument that I kind of want to understand better. So when we're talking about the theistic arguments that most people who have say an intermediate level of apologetics, they're familiar with, the Kalam cosmological argument, maybe some other cosmological arguments, some design arguments, moral arguments, ontological argument.
Oh, those arguments you trot out every time. According to the atheists.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, but you have raised an argument that I've not heard before, and I don't know whether you came up with it or if it already existed, called the digital physics argument for God's existence. So I'm really a learner when it comes to this area. Can you try? Is there a way you could maybe? I don't even know if this is possible, but can you summarize what you're saying there?
Yeah, of course. So I didn't come up with it, the base argument. Johannes Ratz came up with it, and I heavily built on him. I formalized it, put it in its own syllogism. I might even redo the syllogism itself. But basically, it's a contingency style argument. So think of like the Kalam or the Leibnizian. It's another version of that, but it goes one step further. So what do people like Matt Dillahunty say when you give them like a Kalam cosmological argument? They typically will say, well, we don't know what caused the universe itself, but we don't have enough data to say it was God. The digital physics argument goes, yes, we do. So what we do is we look at a lot of modern data that is kind of coming out from recent cosmology. Sometimes you include stuff from quantum mechanics in there. I certainly do. But you can make it with just cosmology, so I'll give the quantum mechanics out to simplify it. So a lot of recent data has been arguing for something called the holographic principle. This is a theory that suggests the entire three-dimensional universe, classical space-time as we know it, can be seen as like two-dimensional information. It's just like almost projected like a hologram. And so recently there was experimental data for this. There was a study called From Planck Data to Planck Era, Observational Tests of the Holographic Cosmology. And they sort of showed that there is a little bit of data to confirm the holographic principle. So then you just start asking, okay, well, if the universe is sort of projected, it's emergent from something underlying more fundamental, what is it emergent from? And this is where the atheist goes, well, we don't know what it's emergent from. Same with the Kalam.
Okay, but now hold on, back up just a second. Let me see if I can get clarity on this. So basically what you're saying is, like you might have in your computer running this software right now that we're communicating with, we have two-dimensional ones and zeros or something like that. And from that, we could, if we had the right technology, because the technology does exist, we could project a hologram that manifests in three-dimensionally.
Three-dimensional universe emerges from information processing on a 2D surface.
Maybe the three-dimensional objects, us, everything in the world around us, maybe all of the information in these objects is carried, is smeared around a distant two-dimensional surface that surrounds us, and we're just in some sense a holographic projection of that distant data.
Oh yeah, we use computers all the time as analogies, so you're right on the case. Like if you think of like a virtual world, like if you're gonna play like The Sims, it shows you how old I am there. But if you're gonna play The Sims, obviously if you go into like your house in the sim world and then you leave it and go out of that house doesn't exist in like a space world. It's just information that uploads when you go into when you turn around and go back into that house. And so the argument is that space-time is sort of like that. It's emergent from underlying information. And this is not me saying, this is what actual physicists will say. So Sean Carroll, he says space is obviously not fundamental. Space is something when you go from classical mechanics to quantum mechanics, space more or less disappears. So at the World Science Fair, they were talking about how we're going to start with information and space-time, we're going to forget about what space-time is. The space-time is going to be emergent from information. So this is the language the physicists are using. What they mean by that is Sean Carroll calls it math speak. Hilbert space is math speak, to use his own terminology. So it's just underlying information. It's, the space-time, our classical universe, is emergent from this more underlying fundamental information, sort of like a wave function extended in Hilbert space. And he calls this math speak. So we know math, it's information. Connect that dot to another physicist who's working on something completely different. His name is Diedrich Hertz, and he's working on quantum cognition. And what he's trying to show is the properties of the mind, the way we think, we imagine, process information in our minds. He says it can be readily modeled using the same type of language of quantum mechanics. So the properties of the mind resemble quantum mechanics. But the physicists over here are saying that space-time itself is emergent from that same type of information, the quantum mechanical type of information. Just connect the dots. The universe seems to emerge from something that is mind-like. So the argument just simply is that using the digital physics argument, same kind of logic you'd get in a typical contingency argument, the universe is emergent from something that is a mind, because that's what it reflects. If you look at quantum cognition, the mind operates in these same type of rules and whatnot. But the universe emerges from whatever that is, that same kind of idea. So it appears, given the data from both of these areas, when you connect the dots, the universe is emergent from a mind.
So this takes me back. This sounds like a 21st century version of idealism.
Yeah,
is that fair?
That's a very good way to put it.
So that has some quirks that I'd like to ask you about. It's been a while since I've read The Principles of Human Knowledge from Berkeley. Okay, but in thinking of those terms, so he's gonna say, think of this can. Okay, but take away everything you know about it from what you've touched, taste, smell, see, or hear, and now describe a can. You can't do it. So what is it? What does it matter without any sort of sense perception? Nothing.
Right.
You know, it's so you get to that, but from a Christian and of course he's Bishop Berkeley, you know, and then of course Edwards seemed to have developed independently his own sort of idealism, but that comes with some quirks. So if at the end of this, if the simulation is being produced by a mind, and that mind is what we call God, I think that's the conclusion of your argument, of the divine physics argument. So how do you explain this in a way that's not divine solipsism, in a sense, not fatalistic, which I think you can tag Edwards with being a fatalist. I don't know if that sticks with Berkeley, but at least for Edwards, he was pretty much a fatalist. Divine, theistic, fatalist, whatever, still fatalism. And then you also have the issue of panentheism, and that might scare some people. So what would you say to push back on people, especially realists, who would say, or Christian realists, who would say, well, this sounds like fatalism, it sounds like panentheism, it sounds like divine solipsism, and we don't really, how are we separate entities?
Right, that's a good question. So I did a video called Christianity and Panentheism, because panentheism is not rejected by the church at large. The Greek Orthodox Church calls themselves panentheists in a lot of ways. Now, they're not strong panentheists. They're not like Hegel, where they think, you know, we're part of like the essence of God. It's more like a weak form of panentheism. It's sometimes called Palamite panentheism, where it's sort of like we're sort of like an emergent world from the mind of God, and we're contingent upon him, but we're not part of his utter essence. Like, we're not part of his eternal, timeless essence. So an analogy I typically use to explain this to people. So think of Gerald Tolkien's world of Middle Earth and Lord of the Rings. Now, Gerald Tolkien creates Sauron, but Sauron is not Gerald Tolkien. Now, this is an analogy, so bear in mind, it's not going to perfectly represent the ideas. Obviously, Gerald Tolkien's world is more deterministic because, you know, he determines all the fates of all the characters in there. But God could easily create more of an interactive style world where he creates free agents that are sort of emergent from his mind, that are able to rebel or not, or sort of distance themselves from the essence of God, the heart of God, so to speak. So you could picture it almost like God is not creating like an RPG video game. He's creating more of like an online video game where you have different people who can do what they want within the video game that's online, different characters can interact, instead of following a specific storyline, so to speak. So now I'm using analogies, and people can always pick apart the analogies and show, well, that doesn't perfectly represent. And I'm like, yeah, but just it's an analogy. Just
we're grown-ups here. We perfectly understand analogies, and that if you can only attack the analogy to not attack the point of the analogy, then you really don't have a rebuttal. You're just picking at a straw man. So we're perfectly fine with analogies here because we're adults. But I get why you have to preface that, because there's a lot of people like, but even still, I do want to ask about the analogy because it does raise a question. And I'm not picking on your analogy, but I've heard this before, especially from open theists, and say, okay, so God has designed a really, really good AI within the simulation.
Yeah, I'm a bald Keanu Reeves in a divine matrix.
Right.
Basically.
Well, no, I mean, God's AI is better than ours, so we are independent. So they're going to say, if we are so complicated that way within the simulation, where we're like a multiplayer online world where everyone's their own character, and they're not being determined by any other, or by the host of the game. Mm-hmm. How can you square that with divine foreknowledge? Because I know I think I think the same way you would answer it, just from a basic William Lane Craig Molinistic perspective. So God, just sort of ordains from his middle knowledge the feasible worlds. If he's going to create a world with free creatures, he has to create a world that is feasible with
our free will.
Well, the second you punt to Molinism, I can already hear some of our Calvinist audience saying, "See, there's that philosophy again."
Yeah, and God's got to deal with the hand He's been dealt.
Right,
and,
wah. But no, I mean, I pretty much agree with you. If you're constructing the world and you know all the various possibilities that could occur within that world, and out of those worlds, the more feasible ones that get you the optimal outcome. Yeah, that would probably work in an idealistic sense, but you wouldn't argue that substance dualism itself, if even an idealist, it's not that matter doesn't exist it just doesn't exist in like there really isn't computers and microphones and everything we see, but it's more that independent of the mind, it's not really there. If you look this way, it's not like it's there or whatever, but you could still affirm a substance dualism in the sense of whatever matter is or whatever the external world is. Mm-hmm. There is a part of you that is immaterial as opposed to the substance that is represented as the physical phenomenon that we observe, right? So you could still affirm a substance dualism in that way.
Yeah, I agree. I call myself a dual aspect idealist. So I'm almost a substance dualist is what I kind of tell people, is because I just say, like, just cut out, if you have two, matter and mind, I just look at matter basically from the idealistic points. It's just, as you mentioned earlier when you were referring to Berkeley, it's just information that's sort of like contingent upon a mind. It's just these collection of properties. So I just look at it more as like an epistemic distinction between mind and matter versus an actual ontological two separate substance between mind and matter. I say it's just mind is fundamental and matter is just information contingent upon.
But it's kind of like you're kind of like going to the other extreme of the materialist. Like the materialist says we're just matter and there is no other substance, and you're saying no, it's actually mind and there's no other substance, practically speaking, or not actually, impractically speaking.
Yeah. And I draw from just basics of philosophy, like you were talking about bundle theory earlier. It's just everything we experience is a mental world. We don't experience another substance, so why posit another substance? And then I can also argue from science as well, because we see the same thing that seems to be, we see the same results from quantum mechanics and cosmology and all these other areas as well. So all from that, basically. The materialist has a far harder time trying to show how consciousness could emerge from the brain and how everything we experience is from another substance. It's much harder to argue that way. It's far easier to argue with what we already know exists, the mind and our experiences.
Yeah. So on theology, though, somebody who's not familiar with all the types of idealism, absolute, subjective, whatever, they hear, "What, you don't think that there's a Coke can? You're crazy," right? That's what they're thinking if they're not familiar with. So somebody would say, okay, well, isn't that somewhat Gnostic? Isn't that, in a sense, aren't you denying that Jesus came in the flesh? Because isn't flesh matter? And I don't know how you would respond to that. My response to it is, well, even Berkeley would say, yes, Jesus came in the flesh, but flesh is not necessarily what you think it is, as coming from a more realist perspective. What would you say to that kind of charge?
Right, I agree with where you're going with that. It's people are sort of holding to these philosophical presuppositions that it has to be a substance. I go back to the analogies. So think of the Coke can you said. Like if I was in World of Warcraft and I killed your character with a sword, the sword is real in that world, and your character really died in that world. And you can come back out of it, and then you could probably revive yourself. I don't know how the game works, but you get kind of that idea that within that world, all the rules apply. We just know the underlying ontology is not what we traditionally think it is. But the same rules and same theology still apply.
Yeah, so insofar as we are aware, Jesus bodily rose from the dead. Your understanding of the underlying ontology of what bodies actually are, in your phenomenological experience, is the same. In your understanding of the distinctions between what we know is represented to us, as maybe Schopenhauer would put it, and in an idealistic way, or even in a realist way, there is no difference in the phenomena that we believe has occurred. Or had we been there, it would still appear to us the way that all natural and supernatural phenomena appear to us. It's not a difference in the way that we perceive the world. It's a difference in the way we understand its underlying form, right?
Right. The noumenal became the phenomenal is when Jesus became the incarnation.
Yeah. So what would you say, have you used this in any debates?
Oh, have I ever? So I debated a guy called Tom Jump, who's an atheist. And I watched a bunch of his debates beforehand, kind of knew what he was getting at. And I'm like, he's not going to see my arguments coming. So I used this. I used an argument from consciousness. I used a specific argument for theistic idealism in that debate. And that went exceptionally well, to the point where even atheists were telling him on Twitter he lost that debate because he had no replies to my arguments. It was probably one of my favorite debates because he just almost was like he panicked. And he kept saying, "You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong." Like he just kept saying that over and over.
Is that the only debate you've had with him? You only had one?
Yeah, it's the only debate I've had with him.
Okay, so that's the one where you were recommending. You said, "Well, I think if you'll just read this book," and he stopped you and he said, "No, I can't even take you seriously right now. What you're saying."
Yeah.
The problem with idealism is you can't refute it. You can be flippant about it, but it's impossible to refute. How would you go about refuting?
Hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, how do you go about refuting what literally is everything we experience? Just building off Descartes, the only thing he says we can know for sure is that his mind exists and that he's conscious and that he's experiencing stuff. That's just idealism right then and there. It's hard to refute something which is basically the only thing you can prove.
So is it fair to say that there's not a principle of falsification for this?
Well, sure, but that's with any philosophical view, I guess, if you're talking about scientific falsification. You can't falsify materialism or naturalism either.
Yeah. How do you get out of your own mind in order to quantify the evidence in any sort of way disfavorable to the fact that you're in your own mind? You see what I'm saying? So you can't step outside of yourself to actually experience that phenomena in order to, disprove that everything that you experience is just mental. How do you get out of your mind?
Yeah, all your input. You have to depend on your inputs.
Right,
And those are the only inputs
you can't
have.
do it. You can't get out of it.
Yeah.
Now people will argue, yeah, but then that reduces to a tautology and not really anything that you can prove either.
Yeah.
So it's kind of at a stalemate with that. But
now let me ask you this question. This to bring it back down to earth a little bit. Would you ever use something like this? I mean, I don't know how much you engage in like personal evangelism with real people who are not virtual figures on a screen somewhere like we're experiencing right now. but would you ever use this with like a lay person? Like, let's say you had, tell us, have you done that and how does that go? Are they understanding? Do they follow?
Yeah, well, what I do is I walk them through and I ask them, okay, so you understand this. I first start by explaining the holographic principle. And typically they'll go, yeah, I get that, the holographic principle. And then I'll say, okay, what do they say? I'll talk about then what physicists say the universe is emergent from, space-time is emergent from this underlying information, a wave function, extended in Hilbert space, this kind of idea. And they go, okay, yeah, I get it. We're emergent from that. So what? And then I'll segue, as I did with you guys, to the quantum cognition, explain how the mind is readily modeled using the same language. And then I just make the connection. So I don't just explain it to them all in 5 minutes go. I walk them through it. I make sure they're agreeing with me as I'm going through. So you can do that the same way you would do just a basic kalam. You just got to make sure you're using very simple terms, making sure they're getting what you're understanding, make sure you're defining what you mean. And it tends to work out from what I've seen.
What would you say what is the most relevant criticism of this perspective?
The most relevant criticism of this perspective? That's an interesting question. It depends on who I'm talking to. So I still get people that will try to say, well, we don't really know. Like some people will try to argue the reverse, that, well, we know the brain creates the mind. The brain creates consciousness. So the universe cannot be emergent from a mind because minds are physical things emergent from the brain. And then you just have to explain same stuff you kind of get from J.P. Moreland, that there is no evidence of that. That's a really bad theory when you start to look at the data in neuroscience. The idea that the mind is emergent or consciousness is emergent from the brain is so many problems with that.
Yeah, it's assumed from the naturalistic presupposition already that it has to be that way without evidence. So,
well, that's what I was going to say. That's not so much it is a criticism insofar as somebody's using it to critique, but it's just a presumption of what we're already trying to talk about.
But see, the thing with
materialism,
the thing with idealism or the holographic principle or all divine physics argument in general with lay people, the reason why I believe that it's not very difficult for them to grasp, because I think almost everyone who has ever lived since 1999 when The Matrix came out into the human consciousness, everybody has entertained the idea.
Well, see, that's the
Everyone
thing.
has entertained the
This is. I don't want to sound in any way offensive to older people. I mean, just a few weeks ago, I did an apologetics thing, 8-hour seminar on a weekend to mostly older people, and they tracked with me just fine with the philosophical stuff. But I find usually with those people, the resurrection case works pretty easily. They're set up to. They've thought about that a lot. It's historical data. They've heard about it their whole lives. They've have their Bible. But the philosophical stuff, and especially stuff like this. I don't know. I find that people that are, let's say, 50 years old and younger, they come prepackaged with all this knowledge from philosophically informed science fiction movies and things that they can kind of identify because they have all those illustrations and examples from pop culture.
Yeah, and when I give this presentation to young people, I do use a lot of analogies. Like The Matrix is a good one to use. I'll use video games a lot because they relate to that. They understand, when I'm in a video game, I'm stuck to the rules of that universe. But when I die, I kind of come out. So they can kind of understand the holographic ideas of the video game world. And so the best way to teach this is just analogies. But analogies is the best way to teach as it is. So I think it works pretty easily in explaining. As long as I don't going into let me explain to you the very intricate issues of the delayed choice quantum eraser experience in conjunction with the Coach-Inspector theorem. I can do that, but obviously not a lot of people are going to understand that aspect.
Right.
That's funny. You're a good communicator.
That's
man.
where they
that's
where they tune you out and glaze over. That's where I tune you out and glaze over. It's like, that's too sciencey for me. And
well, let's get more sciencey, but in an unusual way. So right now you're doing a series, and I know you like to keep your future videos super secret, you said, so we won't go there. But right now you are in the midst of a series on Genesis, and you've already told us where the Garden of Eden is for those who would like to go visit it. And you've talked a little bit about what it means for God to say that something is good. And so why Genesis? What's gotten you excited about this? Now, for those that may not know, and for those who are of the more fundamentalist persuasion, and I don't mean that in a negative way, I mean that in a perfectly acceptable, non-pejorative way. You are, I don't know if you use different terminology, but you're a theistic evolutionist. Is that right?
I'm proud of theistic evolution. Yeah, I love the term. I use it all the time.
Yeah, okay. So you're a theistic evolutionist. You would say that the universe and the earth are as old as whatever the best science says that it is. And you ascribe to a kind of John Walton, maybe Michael Heiser view of Old Testament literature like Genesis, where it would be more of a functional rather than a material creation that's going on in Genesis 1. Am I describing you correctly so far?
Yeah, my view is a mix of those two, really.
Yeah, okay. So you feel, and I would say you'd see that as consistent with, you'd be able, on that view, and I'm not saying this is why you hold that view, but that view would make sense of biological evolution as it's typically understood.
Right. It is typically understood. Yeah, I'm a little different on that as well. But yeah, my view of Genesis, I think, is perfectly compatible with any scientific origins of the universe, Earth, humankind. I don't see any issues with that. So yeah, I'm doing a series where I'm going to go up between Genesis 1 through 11 because there's a lot of questions about that entire section there. And I'm going to go up and do a video on 1 or 2 videos on each chapter and explain as much as I can in the time frame I have. So the video on Genesis 2 is going to come out in a couple days.
So within the scope of theistic evolution, would you consider yourself as one who affirms a historical Adam even within a theistic evolution framework, or do you not affirm a historic Adam?
No, I think there was an historical Adam. I really do. Okay. I don't think that and I'll explain in my video on Genesis 2 coming out. There's no issue with it confirming an historical Adam and being a theistic evolutionist. Those are not mutually exclusive.
No, but there are theistic evolutionists on both sides of that question, which is why I asked.
Right.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, like Ken Ham's alarmist, everything hangs on Genesis. You know, the precedence for and the antecedents for all doctrine is in Genesis. Blah blah. So if you don't read it my way, and then he, of course, old Earth creationism of Hugh Ross is just a slippery slope to Michael Jones, you know.
Oh no.
Yeah, and
There's a quote. That's a T-shirt.
Yeah, so the sky is falling and all of that. So yeah, I know the alarmist nonsense.
So,
that
but
you
what
can
we
get
want to
from that.
affirm on this show is that, you know, when somebody differs from us on one of these non-essential doctrines, that's, you know, they're still our brother and sister in Christ. And I say that because we have a lot of listeners who would balk at that. And, you know, I just want to say we're open to conversations. We want to have an open dialogue about ideas like this. And so I recommend, you know, I've got a series all the way through Genesis. It's not complete yet. There's something like 30 hours on Genesis that people can go check out, where I go through all the different views, including the views that people are familiar with and John Walton's view and all the others. But you could pair that really well, I think, with Michael's series, and you get kind of that side of it from him, and then you draw your own conclusions. Yeah. So, I was going to ask you, what about, have you ever thought of releasing a book or something like that?
If I have the time, yeah. I'd like to get a degree first, but I can't get a degree until I get enough donational support to go full time. So once I get that, I'll get my master's degree in either philosophy of science or maybe Old Testament studies. Haven't decided yet. And then from there, I'll start writing a book on these subjects. But so, because I want to write specifically, I want to write on the digital physics argument and write that for more of like a layman audience in a book form. So ideally do something like that, and then maybe do something on Genesis, because that's the other topic I know a lot on, is what's going on within Genesis. I've read a lot of that, especially recently.
Yeah, you know, it's really interesting because you could write a book and maybe a few thousand will read that book, but you can make a YouTube video and you'll have exponentially more people see that video. So it's almost like,
I know.
Yes, but the smaller percentage of people who will read the book and buy you will make you more money than the ads from one video. So, or at least in the short term.
we know where your headspace is now. Yeah.
Oh, I'm the most. I am a capitalist mercenary. You know, if you come up with enough money, I'll care about something and get involved in it. So,
all right. Well, listen, we really appreciate you being on, and it's been fun. And listen, for anyone that is listening, Dr. Pritchett to my right here is the Vice President of Academic Affairs at our school, Trinity College of the Bible and Theological Seminary in Evansville, Indiana. We're at Trinity sem.edu. And if you're a person who would like to study and go further, you can do it from home, just like you're seeing this happening on the computer right now. You could take your courses that way. So we hope that you'll do that. And Michael, is there anything else you want to say or talk about, or points that you need to make, or anything like that, or pray for Pritchett that he repents of something? Anything going on in your heart and mind before we end this conversation?
And also give a plug to your social media, YouTube, Facebook groups.
You are mercenary,
where you are
aren't
on
you?
Twitter. Yeah, plug it, man. Shameless plug.
Yeah, you can follow me on youtube.com/inspiringphilosophy. Same, facebook.com/inspiringphilosophy. I'm never on Twitter because Twitter's a dumpster fire. My website is inspiringphilosophy.org. But I do a handle on Twitter that I'm never on now. But you just follow me on there. That's what I'm up to. I'm going to finish out my series on Genesis this year. And then in the winter, I have a couple videos on monotheism. And then in March of 2020, I have a video that will probably shock a lot of people coming out. There's a lot of interesting research I found on a particular topic that is very interesting and will probably startle a lot of people, but also excite a lot of people. Because I read one researcher saying, for some reason, all this data has been tabled for 60 years and we don't know why. It was an anomaly. No one knew what to deal with it. So I'm going to do a video on that in March probably, and it's going to shock a lot of people, but I'm really looking forward to it.
This isn't one of those tinfoil hat kind of things, is it?
Nope. This is going to be a historical video. It's not science.
Okay.
It's going to be a lot of historical data, but you're going to find it kind of interesting. I guarantee you that.
March, huh? What? You must be putting a ton of production value into this video if it's coming out in March.
Have you seen his production value? Yeah. It's like infinitely better than ours. I mean, come on.
I spend a lot of time researching. It takes me a while to get to the point. Like I did a video last year where I presented like a structuralist form of evolution, where it's almost like a finely tuned version of evolution. That took me like 3 years to research for.
Well, that's awesome. We appreciate the level of scholarship you're putting into these things. So listen, Michael, we're both big fans, and we wish you the best going forward. We'll hope to do something with you again in the future. And thanks for the what you've done already to kind of you've shared a couple of things around of ours, and we really appreciate that. It's helped us out.
Of course,
and listen, we'll be praying that God blesses your ministry, and we'll see you next time on Trinity Radio.